Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Data and Technology Insight webinar. Set your data free, empowering faculty with course level data to drive student success. My name's Laurie Haycock. I'm the Vice President of Data Technology and Analytics for Achieving the Dream. Joining me today is Allison Ray Acalano, my Associate Director. And I'm privileged to also introduce our panel, who are representatives from Pierce College in Washington. We have Matthew Campbell, Vice President for Learning and Student Success, Tom Broxson, District Dean of Natural Sciences and Math, Eric Gimness, Director for IR, Analytics and Effectiveness, and Carly Haddon, Data Solutions Developer Analyst and Tableau Master. Thank you so much for joining us today. Briefly reviewing the agenda with you. This is a part of our routine Data and Technology Insight webinar series. We offer typically one of these a month, share with you some other upcoming learning events. We're going to share a video that we released recently and highlighted in our most recent newsletter on Pierce College and their student success journey and how they've leveraged our institutional capacity assessment tool. Pierce College, as you may remember, was the co-winner of our Leah Maya Austin Award this past February at our DREAM conference. And give you a little bit more background on Pierce, talk about the cultural change that they've experienced to really foster that student-focused culture, and strategies that they use to democratize data. And then we'll give you a chance to ask questions and of our panelists and have some discussion. So we encourage you to follow us at Achieve the Dream on Twitter and join the conversation. Today's webinar, all of our webinars are recorded and are available for viewing on demand through our Achieving the Dream YouTube channel. All of you who are joining us today will get a direct link to that following the webinar. If you're interested in a particular topic you'd like to be a presenter, please contact Allison at the email shown. And we encourage you to be on the lookout for future webinars and to join us and tune in. So here's some of our upcoming in-person learning events or institutes. In September, we'll be hosting our 3rd annual Data and Analytics Summit that will be held in partnership with SAS again, and it'll be in College Park, Maryland. And then in October, we're going to be holding our first ever Integrated Advising and Student Supports Institute. This institute is for teams of individuals who are interested in doing some advising redesign work. So we encourage you to save those dates and to join us. This will just show you where you can access the Pierce College video that we highlighted in our most recent newsletter, which shares Pierce College journey, how they've linked their Achieving the Dream work with pathways, and how they've leveraged the institutional capacity assessment tool and insights from their World Cafe experience. So we encourage you to check out that spotlight on the ATD website. Now I'd like to turn it over and let you hear from Pierce College directly and let them share their story with you.
All right, well, good morning, or good whatever time it is, wherever you might be viewing the webinar. I'm going to do a real quick overview. This is Matthew Campbell, Vice President of Learning and Student Success at Pierce College. A little bit of an overview of what our district looks like so you can have a sense of the structure of the organization and whatnot. So we have we're a district. We have 2 primary colleges, Pierce College Puyallup and Pierce College Fort Silicon. Those are on sort of opposite ends of the county and are separated by about 16 to 20 miles or so. We also have a large program at Joint Base Lewis McChord actively on the base. We're a single district. We have a single accreditation, but our colleges function as sort of unique. We have a unique district in that we have a single curriculum and a single accreditation. but a large district structure. We've got about 20,000 students overall. Those are fairly evenly divided between the two colleges, with about 3,100 at the military base. You can see our funding model there as well, and about 1,100 employees. Demographics, we're about 61% female. Most of our students are academic transfer. We actually have 2 technical colleges located directly in between our 2 colleges. So in the middle of the county, we have 2 technical colleges that do more of those, the non-pro-tech professional technical programs. We still have some of those professional technical programs on our campuses. So workforce education makes up about 32%. We're evenly split between full-time and part-time, and that's an interesting proposition going forward with our pathways work and thinking about how we design pathways both for full-time students and for those who are doing less than full-time. We are fairly diverse, about 53.7% white, and currently programmatic. We've got 3 bachelor's degrees. It says 2 there. We've since added a 3rd, and a variety of additional programs that we are offering as well. One of the things that really pushed us in the direction that we've been heading was in 2013, coming off of the DREAM conference, we asked ourselves what we really needed to do to close achievement gaps. We were seeing a couple things that we needed to do. One was to increase our retention, increase our graduation, and we had noticed by looking at the data that we knew we had achievement gaps between different demographics of students. So in 2013, we set those goals, and the first goals we set were really sort of the big picture of taking what we had done and bringing it to scale. So we built long-term goals that would we could look at incrementally year to year. So we set incremental goals for each year to get to our 2020 goal of 90% fall to winter retention. So that's a 5% percentage point increase from where we started in 2013. We also set goals around fall to fall retention. So that would be a 10 percentage point increase in fall to fall from 2013 to 2020, getting us up to 69%. And our big goal was really to move ourselves up to 45% as a graduation rate by 2020. Again, about a 20% point increase from where we were in 2013. We started in our data from, when was it? We were at 18.7%. That cohort was really graduating in 2010. So we've seen amazing growth since then, and we're really excited about that, but we are in no way satisfied with the 31.4% graduation rate. So we're continuing our push to move to that 45% goal that we've set. We really saw that setting that goal was a motivator and something to organize around and to build a lot of strategy.
And really, before we even set those goals, this is Tom Broxson. I'm the Dean of Natural Sciences at Pierce College. And we wanted to give you just a little bit of background in terms of our cultural change. What the main point that we're going to be sharing with you today is that we've given all faculty access to all faculty data. And that's a pretty dramatic step, I think, for any college. But we want to make it really clear that we didn't just jump into that. There were a whole series of cultural shifts that took place that enabled us to move to a place where we have such widespread access to course level data, and all faculty can see each other's data. We've divided this really into 4 different chapters. And the first one I'll go over really quickly. This was kind of the impetus to start thinking about how do we move as a college from being a college that's focused on access to one that is really looking and thinking about student completion. I think this is something that's impacted all of your colleges and has really been a pretty prominent topic across the country for about the last 10, 15 years. For us, really what got us thinking about refocusing on student completion was in 2006, we actually had our first performance funding model that came into place here in Washington State, the Student Achievement Initiative. And it wasn't a huge incentive. About 0.8% of our funding until last year was coming through our Student Achievement Initiative. But it did get us thinking about how do we restructure, how do we rethink the way that we do business to get more of our students to be successful, to be retained in their degrees, that they're seeking, and to complete those degrees. Last year, that percentage of the Student Achievement Initiative went up to 5%, so it is actually a little bit more substantial today. In 2010, we thought very hard about joining Achieving the Dream, but we decided not to join Achieving the Dream. We thought that we could make some really good progress in terms of increasing student success, moving more students to degree completion, by putting some things in place on our own. And that actually turned out to be a really, they turned out to be really important foundational pieces for what we're going to be talking about today. The first one is we created an Institutional Effectiveness Committee. And very importantly, this Institutional Effectiveness Committee that really monitors the work that the college is doing is made up very broadly of administrators, faculty, and staff. So it's very very inclusive in terms of who participates in that committee. Our board also in 2010 participated in the Governance Institute for Student Success and came back with a pretty clear message that the college needed to refocus on increasing retention, closing achievement gaps, and increasing graduation rates. We moved further in 2011. We began actually researching some best practices at other colleges, some Achieving the Dream colleges, and we actually started a pretty dramatic reorganization of the college around a shared governance structure to create a much more inclusive and participatory culture. We knew that if we were going to really redesign the way the college was functioning, that we would have to have everybody participating, and all the brain power that we employ here at Pierce College would have to be applied to the problem. So we needed a structure that was going to allow us to get more people involved in the work. And at that point, we really started using data much more intensely and started to try to figure out, we didn't have it all figured out, but tried to figure out how we could really monitor how our students were doing after they entered the institution. Chapter 2 is really our move towards more of a culture of student success. And a couple of things that we put in place before we joined Achieving the Dream was to create a Center for Engagement and Learning. One of the things that we knew we needed to do was invest much more intensely in professional development and getting the college much more engaged in the completion agenda. We also implemented a start-to-finish model, and this was to support our students. As you saw in the earlier slide, 65% of our students are first-generation students, and how do we help those students be more successful in college? So our start-to-finish model is actually today a mandatory orientation, mandatory advising, and a mandatory college success class. That same year, we also decided that we weren't moving fast enough, and indeed we did need to join Achieving the Dream. So we joined Achieving the Dream in 2012, even though we had really gotten started in this work a couple years earlier. One of the first things that we did with Achieving the Dream, and this is really important to the story we're telling today about our use of dashboards and sharing data, is that we shared our disaggregated data with the entire college in the fall of 2012. And it was my job, it was burned into my memory, but getting up in front of the entire college and sharing with the college for the first time some of our achievement gaps. Sharing with the college that 20% of our students didn't make it to the second term, that half of our students were gone after the first year, and after 3 years, less than 19% of our students had graduated. That was a bit of a shock to the college. I don't think anybody really understood or realized that we had such low success rates. I think we had the perception that, like everybody does, that we're all above average, that we had some deficits. What really stood out there as well, and we began to see this on the first day that we shared data, and as we began to share it over and over again throughout 2012, and as we began to do departmental data summits in 2013, was that faculty especially were having a hard time seeing their connection to the data. The data was disaggregated to a level that had never been shared at the college before, but it was still at the aggregate level in terms of departments and courses. So while we could see what the overall success rate was for our African American students, for our Latino students, we couldn't see what was going on in English. We couldn't see what was going on in math specifically. And we realized that with the questions we were getting with faculty and not really seeing how they were connected or impacted the work, that we had to figure out a way to get data that was more actionable to faculty. In 2013, we got to the point where we identified 5 large priority areas, and I'll share those with you in just a minute, that we were going to put in place a series of interventions to try to change. We called for, very broadly, in a very participatory manner, intervention proposals. For instance, one of the 5 large areas was pre-college math, and so we went to the math faculty with data that was specific to them, and then we asked the math faculty what they wanted to do about it. They came back with an intervention proposal to completely redesign our pre-college math sequence. And we really tried to empower them to do that work. Part of the work that we did as we moved into looking at pre-college math in particular was that we set up a series of focus groups. And we set those focus groups up to talk to students who had been successful in our pre-college math sequence. So they were finishing our pre-college math sequence. We knew at that point that only about 7% of our students who started at the lowest level of developmental math ever finished a college level math class. But we wanted to talk to the ones that had successfully navigated to that college level course. What was really shocking, and this is really kind of the second big thing that got us thinking about sharing course level data with faculty, was that the students told us that the #1 factor that was going to impact whether you were successful in your pre-college math sequence was which instructor you took. And it was a pretty clear message, and we were a little bit concerned about that. So we dug into the data a little bit further, and indeed, the students were right. There was about a 3 times higher chance of passing pre-college math if you took one instructor versus another. The variance in success in our pre-college math classes ran from about 30% to about 90%. And personally, I was a faculty member for over 17 years, and I know that as a faculty member, if that was going on in my department, I'd really want to know about it. And indeed, our faculty did want to know about it, and we had to figure out how to get them data so that they could act on that variance that was taking place. There was another piece of evidence. This is really kind of the third piece of evidence that pointed us in the direction of sharing data at the course level. In 2012, Monica Reed Kerrigan and Davis Jenkins published a paper, and the paper was on the first wave of ATD colleges in Washington State. There were 5 colleges that started at the beginning of ATD, and by the time that the study was done in 2011, there had been some change. They surveyed those colleges on their use of data, and their findings were kind of concerning. Indeed, the colleges had seen an increase in their use of data over that time period, but what they saw was a real disconnect between who was using the data and who was working with students, who was actually the most able to impact what was happening with students. Administrators were using the data, but for the most part, faculty, student service, frontline folks were not using the data. Right? So with these 3 lines of evidence, it was pretty clear to us that we needed to figure out a way to get data that was more actionable into the hands of our faculty. Just really quickly, as just a little bit of a side, and we'll continue with the story. These are our 5 ATD priority areas. We actually ended up putting in place in the first couple of years over 40 different interventions that were centered on these 5 priority areas. Engagement, which the Center for Engagement and Learning and our dashboards we're going to talk a lot more about in just a minute. Our start to finish model, Basic skills, we're one of the few colleges I think that's really focused on basic skills and transitioning more basic skills students into college level coursework. Our pre-college education, and then really addressing systematically our equity gaps. So chapter 3 is culture of discovery. And here is where we really try to act on getting data disaggregated down to the course level into faculty's hands. We knew that we had a pretty small IR department that was really struggling to keep up. We had 2 people, and we needed to expand that. We also had the idea that we wanted to create some kind of a dashboard that would allow faculty to see data. And so we hired Carly, who we'll be hearing from in just a couple of minutes. And she was able to do something that really went beyond our kind of wildest expectations in terms of having a dashboard. And you'll see what that looks like in just a minute. We actually have a very powerful tool that allows faculty to not just look at data, but really do some analysis of their data as well.
So by 2015, this was really sort of catching fire at Pierce and really rolling out across the district and across departments. And so we actually moved to a place of integrating the dashboard usage into the departmental outcome requirement. So as departments were looking at and doing their self-studies, they were using the dashboards to set to get the information and the data that they wanted to respond to and that they wanted to report, and that would drive how they were planning for the future. We also, because of that integration, it just started to become second nature. You would walk into a department and the department meeting and they had dashboard up. So it was no longer this thing where you had to bring dashboards or had to bring the data. Like, folks were actively going and looking for that data on their own. So we also built that into a variety of the faculty trainings that we do. We have a Targeted Skills Training Institute, and that was actually the birthplace of giving the faculty the data, because it was a small focused group of folks, and they said, well, we really want to see this data. And there was tension. We had that debate, like, oh, do we release this data to everyone? And we thought about it for a little bit and said, well, let's try it and see what happens. And we did, and it went well. Oh. I was looking at Tom, because Tom was actually in that, was working with that group, and he was the one who put his own data on the line to demonstrate what it was like to be vulnerable. Okay, so I'm getting nods, like, yes, Matt, keep moving. So we actually use that now as a standard piece of our master teacher institute that we do, our Targeted Skills Institute, and our first year faculty cohort. So it's so ingrained into the way that we introduce new faculty and existing faculty to the data of the institution. This has resulted in really building a lot of conversations for faculty, and something that has maybe traditionally been somewhat more isolated. It allows for folks to come together and to be innovative together. So you'll see by 2016, we had 35 dashboards. We had 98 different views, ways of seeing that data and manipulating that data, and 309 users. And of that 309, about a third of them are faculty, and that represents about 95% of our full-time faculty are actually up to speed and using this both in their own professional development and as they do departmental planning. A lot of them are really honing in on the equity gaps, because they see this as a social justice issue and see that their responsibility is really, how do I serve students? And in the past, they weren't really able to see, not only see themselves in the data, but see how their own students were performing across time. You look at one class and you say, oh, that seems about right, grades seem about right. But when you have that longitudinal data and you can really look in at your own, and you can compare it to what else is happening in my department, that no longer happens in a silo or in isolation. So as we discussed, this chapter is culture of discovery, because it's no longer based on just having evidence. It's about going out and finding new information, and then having the opportunity to have conversations to be innovative about how to address those challenges that we identify.
All right, so we're going to launch into exactly what those dashboards are showing us, and I think what's really important about sharing data at this point. This is what we saw when we first started doing that focus group work. Not quite in this colorful a format, but what you're looking at here is actually English 101 sections. So the bottom axis is actually individual sections. And this is the success rate from one term for college, English 101. So you can see that the success rate went from 28.57 for one section to 96.15. And as we begin to look at this, and as faculty begin to see these data, we realized that we had kind of an equity emergency. We really had a situation that we had to address. It really was kind of the roll of the dice for students in terms of whose class they ended up in terms of their chances of being successful. And you know, we obviously, there's probably some things to be concerned about a very, very high success rate and a very, very low success rate. We've also been very clear to emphasize that this is not an indication of learning. It's a signal that something is off in terms of the way that the classes are being graded, the way the syllabus is set up, and very importantly about the way that outcomes are being addressed within the classes. And what we really needed to do with sharing this is to create opportunities for faculty to spend time together talking and norming what's happening in their classes. Here's another slide that we've labeled the hidden variable. Along the bottom here, you can actually see, you can't quite see it, but instructors' names. This is a 5-year average. So the last slide was one term's worth of data, and you can say, well, it was just a bad term. This is actually looking at 5 years of data for, ironically, Math 146, which is our statistics class. And these are the averages. You have to have taught the class twice in that 5-year period to be included in this data. And you can see that the averages range from about 36% success rate to 96%. When we began to dig around, we saw that this was really the hidden variable in student success across the institution. We're spending a lot of time trying to change curriculum, trying to support students in looking at groups that weren't doing as well. But we have this variable within our data at our colleges, and this is probably pretty ubiquitous across higher ed, where you see this incredible variance between sections, especially in really important gateway courses like English 101 and Math 146.
So this is actually one of the places where we often see hands shoot up in a conference. And so I'm imagining some of you raising your hands and saying, oh, wait, what about how successful those students are as they move on from here? Is a 96, are they don't have rigor? You know, that's the argument sometimes you hear against high completion rates, and similar that you're closing people out if you're on that low percentage. So we actually were able to develop a subsequent course completion dashboard as well, so that we could start to look at that piece of information as well. So as students move from one to the next, how successful were they? And if students are succeeding at a high rate and they're succeeding in the next course at a high rate, then there's additional conversations to be had, both about, do we have the right outcomes for this course? Do we understand what those outcomes mean across the faculty? Do we have different standards about what it means to meet those outcomes? And so those are the common conversations that are happening rather than happening inside the brain of an individual. So we're going to jump real quick to some overall strategies, and then we're going to jump into really looking at this in practice. So some of the things that we've needed that have really propelled us was expertise. So you've heard Carly defined as the Tableau superstar, which is not to be taken lightly. That data solution specialist was really key to helping us take data and put it into a form where it was easily accessible and understandable. And that's sometimes can be a huge hurdle to overcome. It was a challenge for our English faculty. You know, our math faculty were like, give us the data, and they just took it and ran with it. Our English faculty were like, this is great, we know there's important stuff here, but we're not really sure what to do with this and how to use it. So we actually ended up getting them sort of a data coach, just like an ATD, to support the English faculty as they moved through and looked at the data. The technology piece was Tableau. We had the benefit of a statewide license to Tableau, though we've recently shifted to purchasing our own server because we know we can be more dynamic with that. We can do a lot more if we have our own sort of control over that server. But that's the piece that really allows us to be able to show this data and allows individuals to go in and start to do that digging. We emphasized a positive data environment. So what that really means is we're not looking at this as a punitive approach. And that's another big question we get is, I could never give my faculty all the data. They would revolt, against us. But we actually found that the faculty, once some folks had it, they were really like, well, I want to see my data, and I want to see my department's data, and that's how we're going to be able to move more quickly. Beta testers, I talked a little bit about that. Applied use, building this into our learning outcomes and building it into those conversations. Hands-on training, this is sort of it is everywhere, and we build training into as many opportunities as we can, and everybody at Pierce College knows what Tableau is. It's on my phone, it's on my iPad, it's kind of everywhere, and it's becoming that way for everyone at the institution as well.
And just going back to that beta tester piece for just a second, I think this is really crucial as well. We don't have everybody being mandated to use the dashboards. The way that we've approached it is we've borrowed a page from the playbook on Diffusion of Innovations. And what we did is we rolled this out is we showed it to just a handful of faculty to start with that we knew were very innovative, that would be very receptive to seeing this technology, to seeing this data, and we beta tested with them. And what happened is they started using it in their office, they started talking to their colleagues, and that got us to the next phase, the early adopters, where it was just kind of word of mouth, people really wanting to have access to Tableau. Very quickly, as we started using it in our outcomes work and other things, we got to an early majority and then through a late majority, and today we have about 91% of our faculty that are actually using Tableau dashboards. We probably, or 95%, sorry, we'll actually probably never get to the point where everybody is using it all the time. We felt that if we would have mandated the use, the people that were the most resistive, the most against seeing data at this level would have driven the conversation. So we would have had the 5% of laggards at the far right of the screen driving the conversation instead of having the innovators driving the conversation. And this I think was a really key part of how we rolled this out at Pierce College. And with that, we're going to hand it over to Carly here to show you this really amazing tool that she's created.
Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is enjoying the sunshine like we are here in the Northwest. Again, as Tom mentioned, my name is Carly Haddon, and I'm the data solutions developer. What we did when I first started here at Pierce back in 2014 is we really started with no systems in place that would allow us to pull data quickly. So we started off by looking at a state-provided data warehouse and rebuilding that to, we call it Piercifying the data. So we created an in-house data warehouse that would allow us to look at historical census data and then current live data. So what we're going to go over today is really just those pieces that faculty are using the most frequently, and that's the successful course completion dashboard and also that subsequent course completion dashboard. I should mention that not only did we want this data first, but there were data to support that this is where we should start. When you have a small office like Pierce did, you can really have a hard time keeping your head above water with data requests. Ad hoc requests can really bog you down. So it was important that we start with the most requested pieces, and this was it. Faculty wanted to know how students were doing. They were manually checking that data. I've talked to some colleagues across the nation. We have some folks that are still handing out sheets of paper in faculty's boxes that just says, these were your success rates. There's no comparison that allows you to see how you fit into the larger dynamic for faculty. So I'm actually going to pull up the dashboards here and bring this over so you guys can see this here. You'll see these are the standard workbooks that we have here at Pierce, and we're going to start with that successful course completion. It's not just a dashboard, it's really intended to be a tool for faculty to use. So while this is loading up here, I can point out that there's lots of filters, lots of flexibility. We even have an Achieving the Dream cohort filter on here so that folks can drill in and look at those degree-seeking fall-starting students. But what you're looking at here is the successful percentage of students over time, so they can choose multiple years, and of course that hot topic is instructor. So each instructor can filter on themselves. And not only that, they can customize the view so that every time they log in, they're just seeing their data, and they can subscribe to it so that it's being sent to them and they don't have to continue to remember to log in. We have more details with expansion where folks can dig into the course level, get an idea of what things look like. You can see right here we're looking at all courses, but we also can look at demographics. So if we're really trying to focus on equity gaps, which we do here at Pierce, you can start to look at enrollment status, see if there's some gaps going on there. What about race and ethnicity? When there's a lot of things in here, we give them flexibility to start to look at certain populations and say, okay, do we have some gaps that are happening here? And I'm kind of moving a little quickly. I do want to mention Allison will be sending a follow-up email to you guys, and we are including a dashboard that's a template for you to use, where you can get some ideas and steal some of our calculations from our dashboard so that you can create something similar to this. But getting back to this, we know faculty can say, okay, well, hey, you want success rates to increase? Well, I can do that. But we know that that's not always the most important piece. We want to know how students do when they leave the classroom. So that was the biggest feedback after we released that first dashboard is, I want to know what happens in subsequent courses. So when we designed this dashboard, it was really with two data sets that were identical. So not only can faculty ask questions about how students are doing when they leave, but they can ask also how students did before they came. So you can see that they're really two separate pieces, initial courses and subsequent courses. So I'm just going to keep this at the default screen. What we're looking at here is arithmetic. That's our Math 50 course. And I've also selected as a subsequent course the same course so we can look for those course repeaters and then the next class in the sequence, okay? And that's algebra. Is that correct, Tom? Yeah, algebra 1. All right, so we also have this initial course grade, and where this comes in very handy for faculty is they can look to see how students do when they don't reach that 2.0. So that successful course completion dashboard that you were looking at, it's defined as a 2.0 or greater or a pass in the class. And we've had a lot of folks say, well, you know, a 2.0 isn't passing in my class, it's a 1.0. And folks can come in here and look to see how many students are actually retaining if they receive less than a 2.0. And I can tell you the faces on folks when we look at that, it's heartbreaking because we know that students just don't come back if they're not passing their classes, whether that be because of financial aid or using those terms such as, you know, probation or suspension, words that can have a different connotation for different populations. So clicking on the next tab in here and taking us to the data, you can see that those students who took that arithmetic class, if they move on in the subsequent quarter to Math 54, their success rate is about 72%. However, if those students are repeating that Math 50 course, less than 50% are passing the next quarter. But look at these ends. These ends are small. This is a great opportunity to do outreach to say, hey, we recognize that you have not, you know, been successful, but you've re-enrolled in the course. You know, these are the opportunities for you to get assistance. This is the services that we offer, and do some outreach in that area as well. I also provide summary tables. You'll notice that the colors aren't necessarily the prettiest, but that's because we like to use the colorblind palettes so that they're accessible. Same here, these tabs here can be read by screen readers. And then, of course, custom filters, because everyone here loves to disaggregate their data. And I'm going to switch us back over here to this screen. Talked about these. And Eric, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Okay. Hi, so I'm Eric Gimnis. I'm the Institutional Research Director here at Pierce. And kind of the important thing to know about this pie chart is that we've got pretty broad distribution of users across different employee types in the college. We semi-jokingly say when people ask us how many people work in IR now, we're like, yeah, about 300, because we've got this whole distributed analysis thing going on pretty well here. Like Tom mentioned before, the way this is split up is that 38% of all users are full-time faculty there in the red, but that equates to about 95% of all full-time faculty within that group. So if you're thinking, one of the things to think about is the culture, because when we initially rolled this out, we did have concerns that, and those were explicit concerns coming from faculty that everyone can see my data. Is this going to be used in a punitive way? Like, why are we doing it like this? And so what we wanted to do was to survey users of Tableau as they went through the training and then started using it to see how they would perceive the way it was being used. And so you could see, if you look at the top two colors on the left bar, which is how comfortable were you initially using Tableau, very comfortable and somewhat comfortable. So the comfortables, was about 45%. Whereas if you look at today's comfort level, it's 67%. So it's gone up considerably. And some of our biggest, I guess, doubters up front are our biggest supporters now. Like when we did our presentation down in San Francisco for ATD, one of our English faculty who was pretty skeptical, I would say, initially, she said there were two great things that we did by giving the faculty the data that allowed them to get on board with this. The first one was that the way that Tableau presents the data is, like Tom said, it's a signal. We use the metaphor that it's like a beachcomber, with a metal detector. And so it beeps, it tells you where there's an issue. And what we did is we just said, beep, here's the issue, but faculty were empowered to solve it. So with English and with math, there was no micromanagement. It was the faculty leadership that was empowered to take control of those equity issues, and they did so in a spectacular fashion. And the second issue was just about going back to the data again and again. And what that means is that an issue would come up, and this was English faculty, so this pertains specifically to the English norming process in English 101. They discover something and go back to leadership, and leadership would support them. And then they discover something else, and they'd be like, well, what are they going to think about this? And then leadership would support them. And so the message that I heard our faculty members saying down in San Francisco was, over time, again and again, they earned our trust. And so the cultural piece, I think, is really one that hinges on the establishment and building of trust, and also the establishment and support of faculty empowerment. So I guess the last part of this is talking about how we, kind of train faculty. So the initial part of it was with the program and discipline review process, where faculty used a couple of dashboards to report numbers and talk about them. But the bigger questions are these questions about why. Like if the dashboards tell us here's an issue to look at, faculty need to learn how to basically be researchers, right? So what we're doing now is when we're training with Tableau, the very next thing we do is we ask them research questions, and we tell them, it's possible that some questions can be fully answered by Tableau, and we give them examples of that. Then we give them other questions where you can answer about half of it. Like you might be able to tell us how many, but not why it's occurring, and then we talk about methods. And then there's a third type, which aren't really questions that can be answered with Tableau. Tableau just tells you that there's an issue there, and you have to answer with other methods. And so the effect of this has been kind of interesting. If I could say anything negative about it, it's not a real negative. We used to be data wait staff, so we get the same easy questions over and over again and have to rerun the data. Well, faculty just do that. Well, faculty, staff, administrators, for the most part, just do the easy ones themselves now. The low-hanging fruit is gone. And so in institutional research now, the questions are getting a lot harder. And also there's a lot more of the hard questions. Faculty will come to us and say, like, why is this happening? And we'll kind of look at each other and be like, well, we'll get back to you. So I think that's a benefit, because we're coming up with these really deep questions, which is actually probably the biggest contribution, is coming up with really good questions. So this is, I think, segueing into pathways. And Q&A.
All right.
Thank you so much. This is Allison Alcalani here at Achieving the Dream, and I want to thank the team from Pierce College for the great presentation and demo. I am now going to start taking some of the questions that some of our viewers might have. You have two options for submitting your questions. You can submit any questions that you might have through the chat frame on your screen or through the Q&A frame. And what we'll do is read them out to the panelists and then provide some answers for you. So I'm going to just pause for a few moments as everyone who has joined us can type their questions in that they might have. So just we'll wait here for a few moments. All right, so I have a question about the Tableau integration. Can maybe Carly or someone speak to how that process went from kind of onboarding Tableau and integrating the data?
Absolutely. So I think the question was what goes into the development process for certain dashboards? Are they prioritized? Who decides on the prioritization? So we use a free service called Asana. And about 2014, when I came on board, we recognized that we had tons of data requests. So what we did, since we're data people, is we let the data decide where the priorities would live. And we still do that today. When there's consistent questions that are popping up frequently, or folks need things more on an ad hoc basis, we look at the data. We look at what's being requested the most, and then we go after that. And that's really why we started with that successful course completion. As Eric mentioned, the questions are getting harder, and so were the dashboards. I just showed you 2 of those 35, and we try and keep them as simple and easy to use. So it just depends on what the questions are, but they're frequently popping up. We find that it saves us time just to automate that process and provide those as a dashboard.
And I would also state that I don't know how much, I always attribute this to Carly, but Carly can talk a little bit more about the ease or challenge of putting together dashboards, because I'll often be in a meeting and I either can't find it on an existing dashboard or it's a new question. And I'm like, if you have time before the end of the week, I would love to see something, or if you could guide me to where it is. And by the end of the meeting, she's created a new dashboard. So now, granted, some of our meetings are long, but yeah, it's one of those things where because of, I'll let you talk about, to what degree is that your talent, and to what degree is that the ease of the use of the mechanism?
Well, I think it's a balance between, I don't want to take too much credit. I think when we initially, and I use the term intentional leadership and actionable data. So, and the reason why I say those things is because when we first started, I asked for those 4 months to not do any ad hoc requests and just focus on really organizing the data structure in the background. And so you really need, if you don't have that skill in your IR office and you need to be working with your IT department or whatever that looks like, that's key. Tableau gives a lot of flexibility in how you can use your data sources, what you can bring in and blend. We're now using SurveyMonkey data and pulling that directly in. I'm now pulling in Canvas data. I mean, we've got all sorts of data that pulls in. So if you have it structured appropriately, it's easy. So, Tableau makes me look good, which I'm appreciative of. But, setting those priorities, it depends on what's available and how easy it is. Because you've stumped me a few times. You've sent me some 10 o'clock p.m. requests that I was like, you're going to have to give me a few days on that. And that goes to, once you get those low-hanging fruit out of the way, those questions get a little tougher.
Staying on this Tableau theme, I'm wondering, we've had some questions come in more about maybe that initial onboarding of Tableau. Could you speak to maybe how long it took for you to set up originally the Tableau system, and who kind of on your end is managing that back-end data and that initial setup? And then perhaps we had another question about why Tableau? Did you look at other softwares in addition to that system, and why did you end up choosing Tableau?
Great question. So yes, our office actually maintains their own SQL Server instance. So we have our own spot where we've warehoused all the data ourselves. So we maintain those databases and have full control in our office. So I know that that's not always the case for many colleges, but with my background, it just made sense to bring that into our office and also free up, our IT office so that they could work on more pressing and integrated, web tools and things like that. So that's what we're doing for the rollout. And I'll click on this. I don't know if I can get this screen to go over that diffusion of innovations. So Tom talked a little bit. I'm going to tap back. Tom talked a little bit about when we first rolled that out. I got to tell you, I went to my math faculty who were already tracking their success rates. Those folks that just love data, and that's who that 2.5% is. They were the folks that were already doing this. I had one guy who's just great. He had charts on his wall of what his success rates were. So of course I'm going to ask him to, be a part of that first beta testing team, and getting constant feedback for folks who have possibly seen our presentation in the past. They'll say, "Wow, that's more dashboards but fewer views." We're constantly adapting and making things more efficient, so that people want to use the tools. I recently had a faculty member call me and say, he was so upset. He's like, "You're hiding my password. Why don't I have this?" And we say, "Oh, it's okay. You just, we'll reset it for you. You were the one who assigns it." But they want it. It's a part of it. And that wouldn't have happened if we didn't start with those folks that were already using the data frequently. They just didn't have the tool to get at it. So,
yeah, and we got to a place along that that diffusion scale where at one point Eric came into. So I'm the VP of Learning and Student Success at Puyallup, and I have a colleague who has the same role at Fort Silicon, and we were meeting, and Eric popped in and said, "So there seems to be sort of a wave starting here, and more faculty want the data. Should we democratize the data? Should we set it free?" And we thought about it for how long? 30 seconds. And we tossed it around in our brains, but not for very long, and said, "Yeah, let's do it." Now I have to preface that by saying it wasn't like we saw a presentation, a webinar, bought Tableau, and 30 seconds later said, "Let's democratize our data." It had a lot to do with that timeline that Tom presented in the beginning about building a culture around urgency, around equity, and around folks really saying, "Look, we have to do a better job, and I have to be able to see where I am in that data." And once we got to that point, people were clamoring to see themselves in the data and to find out. And we've recently, our new string seems to be about data guilt, right? That idea that now I've seen the data and I'm feeling a little guilty about where I am. So how do I overcome that? So the training doesn't just include, here's where you click and this is how you get that information. But it talks about what you're going to see, what reactions you might have when you see that data, about how we don't want to see the dashboard show up on the front page of the news, about all those pieces about the ethics and the psychology behind looking at your own data and the data of your colleagues.
That's a great point, Matt. And when I hold these trainings, I show up in my t-shirt, my nerdiest t-shirt that I have, usually like, data rock star, or
She's got a whole
I've got a whole pile of I love data t-shirts, and we make it a very casual, fun environment. I share every bad joke that I've got. Really, actually, they're really bad jokes, but we make it very casual so that it's not a threatening environment. But just getting back to that question about the back end pieces and the load setup, in choosing Tableau. Tableau was my go-to software. I've been using it for not quite 10 years now, but they're constantly working improvements. And remember, we're up here near the Seattle area, and that's where Tableau is located. So they're a local company for us, and the flexibility that I have for pulling in data sources, I've yet to see a limitation, and it ties in very, very well with SQL Server. So if you guys are running SQL or something similar to that. And I had mentioned before that you guys will get a link to a dashboard. It's in version 10.2, but you can download that and overlay it on your own data and start right away. So I encourage stealing our calculations.
I'm going to move our presentation. Someone had asked about the slide for the video. Oh, there we go. So I'm just going to back up to that one. I'm assuming you mean the ICAT video. So.
Yeah, so that video, that was just a screenshot of where it is located on our website. So in the follow-up email that you will all receive, I will link to that video. But if you navigate to Achieving the Dreams website, it's going to be under our news center. And I believe right now it's at the top. And that link will kind of you can watch it there on our website. It also is as housed on our YouTube page.
Looks like we have another question from Shelley about end of course assessments and do we use rubrics for grading? Yes, we do both of those. Although, Tom, do you want to talk about the changes to the rubrics and what that's been looking like?
Yeah, so I think, you know, until faculty can see the kind of data that we showed today, they don't know that there's a problem. So, you know, really a lot of the work that we've been engaged in over the last couple of years is letting faculty see this and begin to start asking those questions and then to start coming up with solutions and to help lead and nudge them in that direction. We ended up with some common assessments for our pre-college math. We've done that for a number of other classes, but that's really ongoing work. It's really been department by department. For instance, our chemistry department has really flattened out their success rates. It really pretty consistent from instructor to instructor because they've taken the time to do the norming and create common assessments. Other places in the college that work is ongoing, and we still do have some of these really big gaps or this really great variance depending on who's teaching the course. So you know, and I think if you've done this at your own college, you'll probably find a similar pattern. I think it's kind of one of those hidden variables or those hidden things within higher education to see this kind of variance, and it is going to take a pretty deliberate work over the next few years to address it.
We have another question from Angie, password protecting the system. Yes, everything is password protected. When the faculty or staff go through training, they're given an account at that initial training where their passwords and all that stuff is set up. We do have some public-facing dashboards that you know, we give guests access to, but for the most part, all of our dashboards, since they can provide some student-sensitive data, those are password protected. I also see, we'll get back to Stacy's question here in just a second, but getting back to the other question about Tableau, about it being free. There is a free version of Tableau. Tableau Public is available to folks out there. You'll just want to make sure that whatever you publish doesn't have any FERPA issues with that because everyone can access that data. But I have some insights on how you can actually use the desktop version and publish to Tableau Reader and keep that internal if you don't have access to the server. So there's a lot of flexibility for colleges who have some funds set aside to do things, or folks that don't have any funds at all and are ready to make some change. We have another one from Stacy here. We are trying to get a data coaching training program off the ground at our college. Do you have any tips or advice on building curriculum, drumming up interest, or any other considerations we should keep in mind? That's a great question.
Right. We talked about some of those pieces around the psychology and the ethics behind it. And we talked a little bit about how we've built the culture over time. So those are aspects of it as well. Yeah, I feel like I need to sit down and draw up the.
Yeah. Our email addresses are provided. If you'd like to reach out to us, we actually have an outcomes and assessment team that might be able to give, and our SEAL team, which is the Center for Engagement and Learning, we might be able to provide you with some materials.
One thing that we're finding is that as we go into this, a couple years into the process, we're having to do much deeper training. So we're really actually trying to launch a 2.0 level of training this coming summer. Yep,
absolutely. And we had a question about providing training and setup. Our contact information is available, and feel free to reach out to us if there's something that we can assist with beyond that Tableau example dashboard you guys will get a link to.
Back on the training piece, I think one of the great benefits that Eric and Carly bring to what we have here at Pierce is really being able to guide folks to ask the right questions. So people will often come request data, and rather than just saying, here's the data you requested, there is an immediate, well, what question are you trying to answer? And so that helps folks reimagine what they might be looking for and how they might be able to find the right data, and then ask further questions that build upon those. So that element of how to ask the right questions and let that take you to the data, rather than just randomly pulling up data and going down those rabbit holes. Because we've had some folks get lost in those rabbit holes for long periods of time. And then, you know, they emerge from their office bleary-eyed, and it's like, oh, okay, well, had I asked the right question to begin with, I might have been able to be more efficient with my time and my data digging.
And just to add to that too, I think that's great. It's building that culture of inquiry. What are the strategic questions you're asking, and how are you going to use this data? Because you want the data to be actionable. And if it's not actionable, then why are we producing it? So another great resource when you're building a data team is Achieving the Dreams Data Discovery Guide, which is online and on our website. And that really provides the looking at student success through that lens of data, regardless of what your role is at the institution. So I would encourage you to leverage that asset as well.
I know we're short on time here, but we do have 3 more unanswered questions in this Q&A window. It's up to you guys. Do you want us to answer those quickly, or should we respond to those?
Yeah, I think let's close out with those questions. I think 2 of them kind of hit on the same kind of idea around faculty resistance and specific to kind of how you dealt with faculty with lower success rates, and then how when those are made public, and then also resistance from faculty when you're sharing individual course section data. Yeah,
and I would have to say that the resistance, it's hard to believe, has been pretty light. Not very many negative comments, and a lot of that has to do with it's the faculty have access to the data on their computer, on their phone, on their tablet. So it's not being viewed publicly. It's not being viewed in front of the whole department. Usually when a department is looking at data, they're looking at their department as a whole, and they're not looking at individuals. That being said, when we have faculty that have very low success rates, and as dean, I'm working with that faculty member, we don't look at this as an indication of everything that's happening with that faculty member. We really try to use a triangulation process, and this really just gives us one more piece of information about what's happening within that classroom. We also have our student evaluations, we have peer evaluations or observations, and then we have supervisor or dean observations. And what we try to do is really look at those things in a totality and really think about what's happening and how, and really try to go very quickly to the place of, okay, so how do we improve all of these things? If we see low student evaluations, low student success rates, maybe it's time to start thinking about switching up some pedagogy or addressing that through professional development through our Center for Engagement and Learning, and really trying to help people grow and help more of their students be successful.
Yeah, professional development has really been the name of the game in terms of that. How do we respond, and how do those individuals? Some folks have come to us and said, "Wow, I was really surprised at how low my success rates were. I didn't realize they were that low. I want to find a solution to that." And so they've been very active in responding to that. Others are engaging their department and their colleagues to say, "You seem to have a really good handle on this," or that conversation, like we said, is really they're coming together at it as a group to say, what are the outcomes, and are we really assessing the outcomes in the same way? Is that really attributing to why we have such variance in our success rates? And departments do look at all of the fact when we've brought and laid them out side by side, we've sort of trimmed the names off of that to make the departmental conversation a little less but everybody wants to see where they are on that list, but it still creates the opportunity for that conversation and demonstrates the variance that exists within that department. Now, they could go in individually and determine all that information, but we don't make it as easy to see the one-to-one comparison across the entire department.
And I would just add that the vast majority of faculty, when they do have low success rates, want to see that. this is a mirror that as faculty members, we don't have for the most part. You know, in all my years of teaching, I never really knew how it compared, and you're constantly trying to get your syllabus right and get the learning outcomes right, but you don't really have that clear baseline to compare your work against. And faculty, for the most part, have really appreciated having that and have responded by trying to get more of their students to be successful.
Good point, Tom. Or they think they know who's being most successful, and the data show differently. So.
Yeah, but having that clear empirical baseline, I think, is kind of a revolution in teaching.
And I am going to close it out with our last question. I don't know if there's a quick answer for this, but we did have something come in around providing any type of insight that you might have or detail around departmental data summits, who on your end led them, and how often did you have them?
Well, when we started our ATD work, we didn't have the data disaggregated down to the course level, so it really was sharing that institution level data and trying to get people to start thinking about it and react to it, and really creating a sense of urgency. Since we have Tableau, sometimes there's a dean present, but for the most part, it's just the department that's working on that data and trying to work with it. Sometimes it's our outcome assessment people, but for the most part, it's a very faculty-driven process. You know, our faculty come to work at institutions like Pierce College and all of your colleges to try to really make a difference in students' lives, and they really see this as a tool to help more of their students be successful.
Yeah, we don't really have data summits so much anymore. We have regular meetings that involve data.
It's kind of become the Google of Pierce College. There's really rarely any kind of meeting, administrative or faculty, that Tableau isn't open on somebody's computer.
All right, well, thank you all so very much. And we had really great questions come in, and you'll see here on the screen all of our panelists' contact information. Lori has also been sending some resources through that chat frame. She linked over to our data discovery guide, which I would highly recommend everyone take a chance to look through, and also the Pierce College video that we mentioned at the beginning. As Lori mentioned too, we'll be following up later on this evening with the presentation slides, in addition to some other resources that Pierce College has provided us to give to you, and the recording of this webinar. So feel free to reach out and reach out to our panelists directly, or Lori or myself, and we'd be happy to answer your questions and continue helping you build that data capacity at your college. So thanks for joining. Really appreciate everyone joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you.